is. So I'm sorry for everyone here that's watching too, kind of similar. I mean, they're differently presented, but yeah, I was inspired by actually Walter's audio feedback talk a couple of years ago, and that's what got me thinking about this. So, oops, sorry, it didn't change. So obviously the value of feedback is to try and bridge the gap between the students' marks and what they perceive their performance to have been, and then the mark that they may have got, which may or may not match that, and to justify the grade that you've given, and to hopefully help with future performance and to improve the student experience overall. And I guess that can be a positive or negative influence on their experience depending on the way that the feedback is presented. And I am a reasonably new academic, and I'd been presenting it in the form of written feedback previously. And I found that it was hard to convey tone through the written feedback, and because I'm quite a critical person in my feedback, and so not to be too harsh on the students and to kind of soften it a little bit. So I thought about trying it through audio and just doing audio feedback, but I really wanted to give the students the visual aspect of it. So with that, obviously you can do audio feedback where it's just you giving an audio version of your feedback without kind of showing any of the report or essay. You can do the screencast, which Hector talked about, where you're just giving the audio feedback with the assessment on the video, and that's what I chose to do. Or you can do screencast with the talking head where they can actually see you, or it could just be that they can see you alone, which I read some papers where people had done that and just given a short kind of overview of the assessment feedback, and they'd use some humor in there to try to kind of relate to the students. I'm a bit more serious in my feedback. So, but a lot of studies haven't kind of integrated the audio and the written feedback, and they've just done it as a little kind of overview of the feedback. And I wanted to give them quite detailed information so they could really see where they could improve or where they might have lost marks or gained marks. And so sorry, I should say, so I did the screencast feedback where they just heard my voice and I had the essay in front of me, and I've done that in 3 subjects now with essays and literature review. So some of them are 3,000 words. And initially it did take me some time, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But the value of the video feedback for the students, and this is supported by the literature, is that they can obviously hear your tone of voice, and so that makes it more personable and more supportive, and can aid them more in understanding the feedback and interpreting it. It can enhance their motivation and improve their kind of future opportunities in terms of assessments. You can do feed forward, so for their future work, and I think this really showed, because I have 2nd and 3rd year students, and it showed the 3rd year students who'd had the feedback, I could see a real improvement in their work compared to previous years when I'd provided written feedback, and obviously they have other subjects that aid that as well. It can be more specific and detailed and personalised. So as Hector said, I always address the student by their name, and I always say thank you for their assessment at the beginning. They can see where they really specifically need to improve, and they're able to kind of more clearly interpret the feedback and improve and understand where those marks were allocated. And it also improves the engagement of the students with the feedback as well. So I've had feedback from the students to say, I went back a year later and watched your feedback from last year to help me with your assessments this year, which I was really surprised about. Like, she is a very diligent student. It also, like, you get in the literature as well, it said you can get more kind of discussion between the students about their feedback, and maybe that's because they can understand it a little more. And so that can obviously enhance their learning as well. And then it provides that perception of instructor engagement. So it's not just the words on the paper, and they can see that you've really engaged with their assignment. So that can improve their rapport, and they can feel more supported and increase their motivation and interactions with you as well. And it might reduce anxiety for some students, maybe getting that verbal feedback. That was one thing kind of mentioned in the literature, but it wasn't kind of overarching through there. So the value of feedback for the video feedback for the instructor, it has become more time effective. I will say when I first started doing it, it was pretty clunky and it definitely took me longer. But this year, and I did have pretty good quality student assessments this year, so that really helps with time effectiveness as well. So this year, I don't think it took me any longer than written feedback, and probably shorter time period because I'd got my structure much more organised. I can provide more detailed feedback because obviously you can say more than you can write, and it's quicker for them to listen than to read. It creates a social presence for the students, so that I'm more personable and I can present it in a softer manner. And hopefully it's more enjoyable for the students than reading through kind of comments. And I find it more enjoyable for me as well most of the time, but sometimes it's, it depends on the feedback that you're giving. And I think sometimes I harp on things a little bit, and which might get a bit annoying for the students, but I think they get it pretty clearly by then. In terms of the limitations for the student, I've used CSU Replay, and that's the way that I've done it. So I set up an assessment folder in CSU Replay, and I then record into CSU Replay. I turn off my video, and then I show the assessment and work through that. Since I've been doing that, and I make sure I then email it to the student using their banner email, because I was having problems emailing it with like their CSU email. And I haven't had any accessibility problems from there since then, but at the start I did. Obviously the quality, I find CSU Replay, the quality has been a problem. The linear nature, although I find with CSU Replay, they can easily kind of skip back and forward and get specific areas. So the linear nature is not such a problem with that. It might be confrontational for people, but I haven't had any feedback to say that from them. And it might be perceived as more harsh if your tone is not, if you don't have a naturally, some people, their tone is intimidating. So it depends on how you're able to get through that. Some of them can be lengthy, and every now and again I'll have a really long one that's 15 minutes and I try and redo it and I can't get it shorter, but most of them are kind of around what they recommend is around the 7-minute mark, and some are 2 minutes, so they're quite quick. Obviously every student's going to have a different learning style, and so for some it might work and for some they prefer the written feedback. The impact on learning and grades, I can only go by what I've seen in my students, and I've definitely seen an improvement there. It could be a bit nerve-wracking for the instructor. Haven't really found that. Just gets annoying if I have to redo it, if I'm not happy with it. As I talked about, the marking time could be difficult in larger cohorts, obviously. It depends on your how you mark. Technical issues. Yeah, I've had problems with CSU Replay every now and again, but not, I've just had to go into work. I couldn't do it all from home. And your ability to express it emotionally.
Sorry, Raquel, just have to give you a 10-minute warning.
Yep, cool, thank you. So yeah, I prepare by setting up my assessment folder. In my subject folder on CSU Replay, I go through the assessments and I do some just basic written feedback, and I write my notes on what I'm going to say in the video, which is similar to Hector, but I align it with my rubric so that they can see, how I've marked it. And then I show them first the cover page, so I never have the marks come up first in case somebody else sees the start of their video. Show them their cover page, and then I scroll down to their marks, and then I go back up and go through their assessment. And on average, it's probably around 7 minutes. And as I said, how they access that through, I email them. I also put the rubric back into EAST as well, so they've got that. So I've received a lot of positive feedback. Obviously, I've had 3 subjects over 2 years in which I've done it. And I've had positive feedback from my moderators as well, that, and these are all direct quotes, so that it's a valuable way to do it. And my students should be very appreciative. They found it really helpful and how they could do things better. Even people who got really good marks found it really helpful. And that some of them wanted it in every subject. And so, you can see, and then this is a lot more kind of positive comments there. And some were unsolicited emails as well that they would just send through. So they were really appreciative, and I found it's worked really well throughout the sessions. And here are some references that I utilised, and thank you if you have any questions.
Thanks, Raquel. I can just pick up on one point. Early on in your presentation, you mentioned that your feedback became easier due to better assessment design. I think I might be changing the words slightly, but could you expand on that a little bit more, Raquel?
It probably wasn't so much my assessment design. It was probably more my marking kind of criteria. And so initially it was kind of, I was just going through the assessment and talking about, each part of the assessment, but then I made it more structured or aligned to my rubric with the feedback, so that they could understand how the way that they presented their assessment related to the rubric. So it was more improved structure in my feedback than my assessment design.
Thanks.
Yeah, again, I can only support what has been said. And I really like all the innovations that are being done in providing feedback and making it more and more visual, maybe, and audio for the students. And it's really a really good method. Thank you, Raquel. That's a very very nice talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Walter.
Raquel, it's Peter here. You don't have to answer this, but what were your SES scores before you did this, and what are your SES scores since you've been doing this?
Oh, I couldn't tell you specifically my scores, but I could say that I've received a lot of positive feedback in terms of the feedback itself. Not that I received any negative feedback about my feedback before, but I wasn't happy with it. But I can't specifically, I'd have to look again at the analytics of that, sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just quickly say, Raquel, thank you for that talk as well. It ties in beautifully, and I work with Wouter, so I hear about verbal feedback, have been for a few years. But one thing that really stood out to me was tone, and I think sometimes we really forget that tone is really hard to convey with written feedback.
Yeah.
I have tried different styles using Norfolk with the verbal and feedback in a first year subject, and it was received quite well. I've since moved on from that subject, so I don't think it's still being utilised. But another thing that ties in really well is that really clear assessment criteria design. So I know you only quite briefly touched on that, but I think that's something that I would really love to see you maybe present next year on, to see how that actually changed how you give feedback. Because what I have found, and as we've developed our subjects and the new course that we put together, was that the marking criteria needed a really big update. So I think when we reflect on even our own feedback from students, that we need to start updating even the criteria to see how then we modify our own feedback to students, to not just give feedback, but that that word, that feed forward word, because I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, and I think it does really make you reflect on your criteria in terms of your rubric, and to make sure that that does enable you to
Yeah,
appropriate feedback, and
but
yeah,
also
so
our
did adjust
teaching, I
that.
think.
Yeah, sorry.
Also our teaching and how
Yep.
we teach the content that is to be included. I think that, you know, it all ties in really well. But no, great talk. And I really would love to see you or Vouter or Hector actually talk about, you know, that modification of criteria with the verbal feedback and how that actually improved that feedback as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and I will have to
Thank you.
wrap it up at this point. Thank you, Raquel. That was an excellent counterpoint or excellent perspective on Hector's talk. And it looks like you've got a new presentation for next year as a result. So much appreciated. Thank you, Raquel. So now we move on to our third presentation for this session